Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Reading Buddy Book Club, where today we are continuing Race to the Bottom of the Sea. If you guys haven't picked up your book club kit and your copy of the book yet, go ahead and do that. They're at the preschool desk. If you do have your book club kits, go ahead and keep working on your crafts and your coloring pages. And before we start reading, grab your reading buddy and let's get started. What about supplies? Merrick turned to his comrades. Bloody Elle started to open her knapsack, then paused. Now, Captain, she said slowly. I know this isn't your first choice in grub. We found the crate unattended in the harbor. Cheap Shot Charlie cut in. Both pirates were nervous, Fidelia realized. Bloody Elle traced her fingers along the thickest of her bracelet tattoos, and Cheap Shot Charlie's eyebrows pushed so far down on his forehead they cast a shadow over his eyes. There isn't a spare bit of bread or salted meat on the island, Cheap Shot Charlie said, unapologetic. The Undertows got everyone in lockdown, and there won't be any ships to loot either, Bloody Elle added. Without a word, Merrick took the knapsack from her hands and peered inside. It was all we could find, Captain, Cheap Shot Charlie said. Merrick tipped the knapsack upside down, and an avalanche of sweets fell onto the floor. Kaleido-rainbow figs, Crackamello bars, Choco glumps. A logo was emblazoned across every bright yellow wrapper, a hot pink ship with mint-colored flags, curling like ribbons, sailing on a whipped cream sea, beneath the words, Bon Bon Voyage, Sweets Shop. Fidelia's heart panged at the sight. Bon Bon Voyage was her favorite sweet shop. The heavenly cotton candy-scented Wonderland was located right next to the Book and Bottle on the boardwalk, so most nights after field studies, Dr. and Dr. Quayle had let Fidelia pick a green note's worth of sweets, usually as many apple crayon truffles as she could fit in her pockets. The smell of the sweets hit Fidelia like a sugary wall. She still hadn't eaten breakfast. Merrick, however, glared at the pile of candy with his good eye as if sweets were his sworn enemies. He nudged a Choco glump with his boot, his breathing slow and deliberate. Captain, Bloody Elle pressed. Pack them up. Merrick's orders came. Put out the fire, then we leave. He stalked to the Quails' bedroom window and pulled back the curtain with a scarred finger. The two pirates knelt down and shoveled the candy back into the knapsack. Cheap Shot Charlie unwrapped a striped, sprinkled bar and took a bite. He said. I haven't had one of these in ages. Bloody Elle grabbed a sweet, practically drooling. Fidelia's stomach lurched with hunger, or maybe that was a knot of fear and uncertainty snarling inside her as she pondered the enormous task ahead of her, a dive, possibly hundreds of feet down, to locate a lost treasure buried by algae and sand and time. And if she didn't do it, or couldn't, Merrick the Monstrous would no doubt add her to his list of victims, if they even survived the journey. We're all clear. Merrick let the curtain fall, turning away from the window. Time to go. The pirates slung their knapsacks over their shoulders. Cheap Shot Charlie snuffed out the fire in the hearth. Bloody Elle scarfed down one more Kaleido-rainbow fig and threw the wrapper onto the rug. Fidelia stared at the wrapper. Part of her wanted to shout at the pirate for the careless littering. But it didn't really matter, did it? It wasn't her parents' bedroom anymore. It wasn't her house anymore. When she didn't move, Merrick seized her arm to make her move. Wait, she said. I'm supposed to just swim down to the bottom of the sea and fetch your treasure? You're a quail, Merrick said. Isn't that your second nature? We use equipment for our research, Fidelia pointed out. For a dive that deep, my parents would use a diving suit. Or the egg, she thought with a pang. A growl like an annoyed jaguar came from Merrick's throat. You have one, I assume? Down in the garden shed, Fidelia said. She pictured the department heads from the university showing up tomorrow morning to gather the Quails' collection and finding their expensive diving suit gone. More than a fair trade, she decided, considering that they'd taken away everything else. All the tangible, touchable memorabilia of the Quails' adventures would be locked away in a cold university laboratory, to be squinted at beneath microscopes, or in a display stowed behind glass. She hated that. The house should be allowed to stay just like it was forever, a museum dedicated to the two greatest scientists to ever live. Rain pelted Fidelia as she led the pirates through the yard. She didn't stop to prepare herself as she hurled open the garden shed door, and before she could think or breathe, there it was, the salvaged fragments of the egg. All she could do was stare at the smashed submarine, her invention, her creation. She had been so certain it would be safe in an ocean storm, but the undertow had squashed it like a sea snail. Her parents had always trusted her inventions, and it had cost them their lives. She turned away from the pirates so they wouldn't see her blurry eyes, and took a few steps into the shed. A hole in the roof dripped raindrops onto her head. "Get what you need," Merrick said. "Clock's ticking." Fidelia tiptoed around a pile of mismatched fins, past the rusty diving bell, an antiquated relic of marine biology equipment the Quails kept around as a sort of joke. Past life jackets, past drag nets. But where was the diving suit? It should have been here, in the back left corner of the shed. But all she saw was an old broken helmet, barnacles still crusted on the visor. Fidelia nudged it with her foot. A refugee spider scurried away into the shadows. "It's gone!" "Well, where'd it go?" Merrick said. Fidelia thought. The university. They must have come early. But why didn't they take the rest of their equipment? Clear out the house? Typical academics. They make sure to grab their costly diving suit first and left the true prizes behind. The unicorn fish skeleton, the bramble shark fin, all the photographs. She cursed, and then looked at Merrick helplessly, who shrugged. "Now what am I supposed to do?" "You're the inventor," Merrick said. "Make a new suit on the way." Fidelia shook her head. "I don't have the right tools. I'd need a bolt of canvas and a pump and—" She stared at the pirate captain. "How did you know I was an inventor?" "I know all about how you Quails conduct your research," Merrick said. "Your hydro scanner, and your air spinners, and your submersible there." He jutted his chin toward the ruined egg. Fidelia's mouth fell open. The air spinners were Fidelia's early attempt at replacing regular old fins with foot propellers, thus reducing the amount of energy used by a diver. A brilliant concept, but an utter failure in execution. The air spinners weren't flexible enough to be steered. "How did you know about—" Fidelia started, and then answered her own question. Air spinners were her special project at least 4 years ago, right around the time the Quails were working on their manuscript. "You read their book. You read Exploring an Underwater Fairyland." Merrick wrapped his pea coat tighter around his chest. It passed the time on the crossing to Mulvania. His brilliant blue eye burned past the lens of her glasses, right into her. "Now quit stalling. You're fetching my treasure. I don't care if you have to grow your own set of gills." Fidelia's skin prickled. "Gills?" she repeated, and straightened. Cheapshot Charlie lunged for her, but she sidestepped his grip. "She's wasting time, Captain. Let's go." Fidelia ignored him. She walked to the back of the leaky shed, where a dinged-up farm table served as her old workstation. Bolts and screwdrivers littered the surface, along with sketches of half-baked ideas on blueprint paper. Her hands ran along the side of a dusty cocoa bean crate. She lifted the box and turned to Merrick. "A box of toys for the long trip?" Merrick said. Fidelia swallowed hard so her cheeks wouldn't burn. Nothing more than a toy for bored schoolgirls who like to play at science, the patent office had said of the hydro scanner, one of her most successful inventions. What would they say now about this box of junk? A hodgepodge of misplaced ambition? A waste of scrap metal? "My own set of gills," Fidelia said, rattling the contents of the crate. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. The water eater, an invention she'd worked on for almost a year. It was her pet project, the one that kept her up most nights, turning it over and over in her mind. It was also the project that she could never get right. Every few weeks, she had what seemed like a breakthrough, which only ever lasted a day before she threw it back into the crate, disgusted and discouraged. It had been sitting in the shed for months, put away in its crate, in its grave, where it couldn't taunt her, where she could forget about it. Merrick looked down at the crate, and Fidelia held her breath. "Doesn't look like much," he said of the strange little mask. Its failed filtration system broken down into its basic parts, the loose screws rolling around the bottom of the box rebelliously. "Well, it's not finished yet." Hot defensiveness curled in Fidelia's chest, its flames momentarily melting the chill of her fear. "And you think you can finish it before the big dive?" Merrick didn't ask this, but it still sounded like an inquiry. And it sounded like he already knew the answer. Fidelia crumpled, staring at the crate. If she couldn't get the water eater right when her parents were here, bringing her toast with tomato jam during late-night work sessions, lending an ear when she needed to talk through the mechanics, how could she possibly get the water eater right without them? "Captain," Cheap Shot Charlie said, his teeth gritted, "we need to go." "1 minute," Merrick said. "She has 60 more seconds, then we leave." Fidelia's thoughts raced, her body drumming with panic. She set down the crate and took her observation book from the bag, flipping through it. Maybe a solution would jump out among her scribbled notes and slapdash diagrams. "Quail," Merrick said. "I need more time," Fidelia cried. "You're out of time," Cheap Shot Charlie shrouded her in shadow. "Grab your box of junk and start walking." Fidelia picked up the crate, her arms shaking. I can't do this without them." Before she could stop it, a tear streaked down her face. How could she ever have believed this could work? She was just a girl, orphaned and lost, treading water alone. "You have to." Merrick's voice rolled like thunder, vibrating Fidelia's ear as he leaned over her. "Now get your head on straight and think." Fidelia walked past the pirates and back into the shed. She tuned out Cheap Shot Charlie's impatient glare and Bloody L's pacing and ducked her head into the cockpit of the submarine. Right here, she thought. This is where Mom and Dad were, right when it happened. What were they thinking as the water rose higher and higher? She bit her bottom lip, trying to focus through the slow ache of her sadness. If only I could speak to them one more time, hear their voices, pick their brilliant brains. Wait! She opened the compartment in the egg. Yes, her parents' observation books were still there, wrapped in oilskin. Her mother's small plum notebook, bound closed with a strip of leather. Her father's square black notebook with a square bold print. Fidelia flipped through her mother's observation book, and entries jumped out at her. Notes on the reanimation of starfish limbs, notes on rubber eels, notes on the sleeping habits of carpet sharks. Dr. Quail's hen-scratch handwriting was difficult enough to read when curled up in a cozy reading nook, but the leaking raindrops soaked the ink, making the letters run like black teardrops. She scanned her mother's recap of the day a sea otter sneezed on her dad, sending him toppling down the riverbank, one of the funniest days in Fidelia's life. And now she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from toppling into despair. "I don't know what Mom and Dad would do," she told Merrick, each word wobbling, "but I think I can find out." Merrick the monstrous leaned close, his blood-red eye inches from her glasses. "I hope so," he said. "Or you'll be closer to the fishes than you ever wanted." Chapter 8. The autumn morning stayed overcast and wet as the unlikely group walked along the main canal. Fat raindrops fell in a gray curtain. That, combined with the undertow's ever-looming presence in the bay, meant Arborlee's streets were empty of people. Merrick, nevertheless, pulled the collar of his pea coat up as high as it would go, tucking his face out of sight, a turtle retreating into its shell. He was short, Fidelia realized, not much taller than she was, a detail she hadn't noticed until his two comrades left his sides to flank hers instead, hustling her along. An intersection came up, Arborlee's High Street, cutting in front of them. If they turned left, they'd walk right past the library. Fidelia could see it now, the white-bricked back of the building, the flat roof, the loft window, round as a porthole. Her pulse spiked. What was her aunt doing right now? Finishing the encyclopedias? Working the circulation desk? Still expecting Fidelia to trudge back home from the Quails' old house for dinner in just a few hours? Fidelia would be long gone by then. If she could steer the pirates within range of the library, she could yell. Aunt Julia kept the library bone quiet. Maybe Aunt Julia would hear her and run outside, and then Fidelia would be out of this mess. She could go back to the sofa and the cat and the books and the mainland, she reminded herself, and grimly pressed her lips together. A new life on dry land, but a safe one. She veered to the edge of the curb casually, trying not to give away the fact that her heart had leapfrogged into her throat. You know, the library will have information on indigenous diving techniques, she said. Merrick and the other pirates stared at her as if her nose had just turned into a sea cucumber. It would probably be good to have a book or two, just as a backup. Books? Merrick spat the word out like it was moldy. Enough books. He gripped her arm roughly. You stay close. We wouldn't want you wandering off. Look out the window! Fidelia shouted mental messages at Aunt Julia as the library slipped farther and farther away. Come outside, now, before it's too late. Merrick strong-armed her down a side street and an alleyway, a shortcut to the harbor that bypassed the high street and the Book and Bottle. Fidelia could smell it before she could see it, a sniff of brine, of wet rocks. There it was, the stretch of dappled gray and brown pebbles, white foam lining the shore like an antique lace, and the ocean. Fog collected in the bay, so she could barely make out the sea beneath it, slate blue, shimmering, beautiful and terrifying in its infiniteness. As Merrick corralled her along the boardwalk, dread collected under her ribcage like beach trash. Yes, the ocean had once felt more like home than her actual home, but now all she could think about was how, in these very waters, her parents had Quit your stomping. Merrick's fingers dug into the softness of her forearm. You're making more noise than a three-legged man. This would all be easier, Fidelia thought, if it was a normal day. Not only would the pirates have a devil of a time snatching her in front of a crowd, but if the harbor was humming with the usual business of the cocoa trade, if the sky was a clear blue, it would feel more like greeting a comfortable old friend than this silent, still implosion of an unbearable memory. But everything was exactly as it had been the day she'd lost them. Rows of ships floated, stiff as a line of coffins awaiting their eternal occupants. The earthy smell of cocoa beans was ghostly faint, carried by the rancid low-tide breeze. With every vessel they walked past, Fidelia thought of all the sailors who ran it. A carrack with shining turquoise banners, the Puck, Captain Beagle's cargo ship. An old caravel called the Spanker, which Ida Quayle called antique and charming, and Arthur Quayle called dowdy. The Anemone, Ratface's clipper. The lazy mermaid carved into its bowsprit, in desperate need of a good polish. All these sailors, sea dogs and rascals, every one of them, but at the Quayles' funeral, their faces hooked down into frowns so sharp they could have fished with them. Would that be the last time she'd ever see them? Merrick stopped at the gate of the chandler's warehouse, a roofed yard filled with shipping supplies. Open it, he commanded his comrades. Grab a dory. A dory? Fidelia echoed, and her blood turned to ice. Did the pirates think they could paddle a dory in the undertow? We can't take a dory all the way to the tropics. You think I would be so stupid? Merrick said, his grip on Fidelia's arm still concrete strong. I've gutted men for lesser insults. Cheap Shot Charlie jimmied open the lock, and he and Bloody Elle dashed into the warehouse, past bottles of linseed oil, past the buckets of pitch for waterproofing wooden crates, past gleaming new hatchets and lanterns, past brooms and mops. Back in the far corner of the warehouse, a row of white dories leaned against the fence, their long noses pointed up at the sky. Cheap Shot Charlie lifted one of the boats with his massive arms, and Bloody Elle carried the oars. Nice and easy, Merrick muttered as the two pirates slunk down an aisle. If the dory knocked against even one of these shelves, they'd all fall over in a domino effect, loud enough to bring someone running to investigate, undertow or no. Fidelia held her breath, hoping one of them would trip or stumble, but the pirates managed to safely sneak the dory out of the warehouse without a sound. Merrick tugged Fidelia's arm until she was forced to follow. This way. He He led her away from the warehouse, away from the boardwalk, and to the beach. To the beach. Cheapshot Charlie carried the dory to the shallows and threw it on the water with a slap. Instantly, the tide tried to pull the boat away from land, out to open water, out where the undertow could tear it to driftwood. Fidelia froze. You said we weren't going out in a dory. I said no such thing. Now move. Merrick dragged her forward, her feet making parallel tracks in the pebbles. Fidelia's boots dipped into the icy water for the first time since... No! Her voice was strangled. She locked her knees and skidded to a stop, the toes of her boots sliding beneath a mound of pebbles and sea foam. She couldn't do it, couldn't go back in the water. Get in the boat. Merrick clenched her arm above the elbow. His blue eye seared into her with a shimmering subterranean fury. But just as Fidelia was about to submerge her boot in the water, drown her last hope, Merrick coughed so violently he bent over, dropping his grip on Fidelia, her chance to run. She took it. She twisted out of his reach and sprinted back toward the boardwalk. Charlie, Elle, Merrick barked between coughs. She's running for it. Pebbles crunched under Fidelia's boots. Her legs were on fire. It had been weeks since she'd stretched them like this. They were achingly out of practice. Away she ran, the sound of crashing waves fading with every step. Which was she running from harder? Merrick and his mates, or the water? A gunshot. The pebbles beneath Fidelia's feet flew into the air. Behind her, Merrick stood at the bow of the dory, like a king riding atop his fur-lined litter, loading his pistol, while Cheapshot Charlie and Bloody Elle kept the boat parallel to the shore. Either we take you with your toes or without, he hollered. Fidelia didn't stop. Let him shoot, she thought. He'll wake up the whole hibernating island with that noise, and then they'll have him. You'll also be missing these, Merrick said. Fidelia looked back. The pirate captain held her parents' observation books, one in each hand, open so the pages fluttered in the sea breeze. Fidelia's stomach flip-flopped. She stumbled to a halt. Their notes, their research, their journals, their random thoughts, every moment her parents had deemed worthy of capturing. All of it was there, in Merrick's hands. He must have stolen them out of her bag, knowing they'd make the perfect hostages. They come with me, Merrick continued, and I guarantee I won't be as careful with them as you are. He dangled them over the side of the dory, letting the spray dampen the pages. Anything could happen to these fragile little things. What if they go for a dive of their own? Stop, Fidelia shouted, almost roared. She pivoted in the pebbles and ran back to the water's edge. Losing her parents' books, their words, her only link to them, she'd sail straight through the heart of the undertow to keep that from happening. She waded in the frigid water up to her ankles, then her thighs, then her waist. The dory had drifted far enough out that she'd have to swim for it. Her lungs seized from the cold, yes, and also from the gasping fear that suddenly paralyzed her muscles. It's a shock you haven't grown gills, Ida Quayle used to say every time Fidelia emerged from the sea, sopping and smiling. 6 weeks since she'd lost them. 6 weeks since she'd last taken to the water. Oh, Mom, she thought now. Would you ever recognize me now, this timid girl I've become, this landlubber, a coward? Summoning every bit of courage she could find, she swam, limbs sweeping through the water as if she were embracing it, or clawing and kicking at it, more accurately. A baby wave gently swept over her head. Under the water, she panicked and scrambled for air. Had she already forgotten how to bob with the tide, or hold her breath? The cold water seeped into her airways, a salty flood through her nasal passage. Just as she opened her mouth in a frantic underwater gasp, a huge hand grabbed her collar and hauled her up into the dory. Sputtering, she pulled off her glasses, blinking away seawater, and as soon as the world came back into focus, grabbed her parents' observation books from Merrick. You keep threatening to hurt me or kill me if I don't do what you want, she said flatly, her teeth chattering. Well, the undertow will turn this entire boat into matches. She shivered, her nerves raw. We won't even make it out of the bay. Nobody sails in the undertow. Not even my parents would have risked this. Please, this treasure of yours can wait until spring. It's not worth your life, is it? And Cheap Shot Charlie's and Bloody Elle's? And my life?" she added silently. "The undertow should be the least of your worries." Merrick pulled the silver pocket watch from his pea coat and checked the time. Then his good eye brightened, finding something behind her. Fidelia arched herself around in the dory. Emerging from the swirling fog, anchored to the last shoal before Arberley Bay deepened into true wild ocean, was the ugliest, sorriest ship Fidelia had ever seen. It was a monster of a ship, an old sloop of war built at least a generation ago, with dark masts jutting crookedly like ribs of a beast. Ribbons of paint peeled off the beams, and an emerald slime coated the hull at the waterline. "That's your ship?" Fidelia didn't bother masking the mockery in your voice. "Does it even sail?" "Better than any in the water." Merrick spoke as though it were a lever, not a ship. "Captain," Bloody Elle said softly. Carefully, Fidelia noticed. "Look at her bulge." They all tilted their heads, peering at the port side, which curved far more than was desirable. Water damage, Fidelia diagnosed. The wood warped far beyond repair. Merrick pressed his lips tightly together. The pirates rowed their captain and their captive to the side of the ship, and the closer they got, the worse the ship looked. Grime along her boards, ropes fraying, a tattered red flag hanging on the mast. A red flag, the mark of a ruthless pirate. "Can she make it, Captain?" Bloody Elle asked. "Of course she can," Merrick said. But Fidelia couldn't hold back a scoff. This was Merrick's grand vessel, the ship that would carry them along the cocoa route to the treasure. By her guess, it wouldn't make it out of the bay. "We just left an entire harbor of ships, good ships," she said. "If we turn around now, I don't sail on any ship but the Jewel." Merrick's tone was clear. This topic was doornail dead, buried and finished. He seized a frayed rope and pulled himself onto the deck of the ship. The Jewel. What a perfect name for the flagship of a pirate, treasure-thirsty enough to kidnap a girl and send her overboard for his gold. But misshapen boards and faded sails aside, the Jewel embodied speed and nimbleness. Fidelia could easily picture this ship in a previous life, darting through shoals and outrunning the gigantic peaks and galleons of the Queen's own navy. With Bloody Elle and Cheap Shot Charlie on her tail, she followed Merrick up and into the Jewel, landing on the deck just in time to see Merrick touch a brine-wrinkled railing. "Look at her wood," he whispered, "so far gone." "Does she have one last trip in her?" Bloody Elle asked as she climbed aboard the ship. Merrick coughed. Or was he clearing his throat of some sentimentality congesting there? "Let's get her out to sea, mates, and find out." Fidelia settled herself onto a bench in the lower deck, the lull and sway of the ship rocking her into a trance. She gave in, closing her eyes. It had already been a long day, the longest since September 30th. And it was barely afternoon. "Are you sure she's the right girl?" Cheap Shot Charlie's voice could barely be heard above the din of the sails flapping. "She's panicked at water like a cat." "Maybe so," Merrick says, "but she's the one we want." The Jewel got her bearings, her cream linens catching the wind. By the time the pirates brought the ship out of the bay, Fidelia was fast asleep, glasses askew on her nose. The bag with her parents' observation books in it clutched tightly against her chest, a life preserver to aid against this great mess she'd found herself drowning in. 2 years earlier. It was a crisp, blue morning, the kind that should exist only in paintings. There wasn't a swell on the sea as the Jewel sailed, sunshine gleaming off the polished wood, her hull full of spoils from the latest raid, chests brimming with strung rubies, crates of fresh cocoa beans, gold doubloons. A roll-top desk in the captain's quarters was plastered in nautical maps. Charts of detailed cliff lines, charts of water depths, charts of territories, charts of unknown seas. The papers overlapped and bubbled, mirroring what the inside of Merrick's brain must have looked like. On top of the charts were letters. They'd been read and reread so many times, the delicate stationery had started to tear at the creases. Merrick picked one up and traced its salutation with his rough fingers. "My dearest love." A knock came at the door. "Come," he said gruffly, and hid the bundle of letters beneath the maps. His quartermaster came into the office. "Are we there?" Merrick asked. "Nearly," Bloody Al said, a nod or two away. "Tell the crew to unload everything from the hold except the beans. We give those to Taj next time we hit the bodega." He strolled to the drink cart and uncorked a bottle of rich chocolate rum. "And put Charlie on first watch." "1,000 pardons, Captain," Bloody Al interrupted, "but you should see this." Merrick scowled, smoothed the map on his desk, and followed her out to the deck. The Jewel slowed as it came into a stretch of turquoise water. An island with moon-white beaches and a jagged green palm tree skyline sat peacefully on the horizon, just a mile away, a paradise, but not the Jewel's intended destination. Merrick's crew hopped out of his way as he stomped across the boards. This was supposed to be a quick stop in the tropics. Whoever was responsible for holding him up would be at the receiving end of his full wrath. He spotted it immediately, the reason for all the fuss: a gaff-rigged sails of a schooner. Moored in the water not 50 feet from where the Jewel now cruised, a crimson flag billowed from its masts, a black silhouette of a bear on all fours prowling across the fabric. Pirates, and because of their ursine epigraph, Merrick knew exactly which ones. Cheap Shot Charlie came up behind Merrick, his eyebrows furrowed into a line. "Should we open fire?" "That won't be necessary," Merrick said. "Pull up beside her." As the Jewel neared the bobbing schooner, Merrick could see its crew. They were the olive-skinned pirates of the eastern mainland, patterned scarves tied around their twisted, sea-gnarled hair. A bearded man stood at the helm, their captain, judging by the way his tunic hung, its fine Mulvanian thread shimmering gold. He gaped as the Jewel moved closer, as though he couldn't imagine what he was seeing. As though he had tunneled through an abandoned mountain mine and stepped into a dragon's lair. "And here comes the dragon," Merrick thought. "Hello there," he waved jovially with his free hand. The other still clutched his pistol. One of the pirates crossed herself and muttered a prayer. "Fine afternoon, isn't it?" Merrick said. "These tropical seas are like stained glass. Such pleasant sailing." The other pirates still said nothing. "How strange it is to see unfamiliar faces along this stretch," Merrick continued. "And the Rascalat is such a long way from Mulvania. Are you here for the fine fishing?" The Jewel's crew tittered behind their captain, hands finding their various guns and blades. Merrick the Monstrous was frightening enough when he brooded or raged, but when he was polite, when the adder pretended to be a friendly garden snake, who wanted only to slither up your arm and ride on your shoulder like a pet, that's when he was most dangerous. That's when he struck. "Captain," Bloody Al said from the lower deck. She hauled a soggy, sputtering pirate up from the side of the Jewel and over the railing. "He was in the water. Please," the half-drowned man cried, the sea dripping off him as Bloody Al dropped him onto the deck like a trout. "I was only checking our hull for barnacles." The pirate pulled off his soaked paisley headscarf and wrung it between two nervous hands. "Tell me," Merrick said quietly, trusting the breeze to carry his words, "how in the world did you manage to find it?" He fiddled with his silver hoop earring, his entire face the epitome of boredom. "You Mulvanians don't usually loot this far south, do you?" "No," the pirate admitted, "but we keep a cache on one side of this island. Food barrels and coin and rum for emergencies. The Navy's pulling some sort of blockade. Bridgewater's got 30 galleons parked between here and the cocoa route. So we took the long way around, and you found the cave," Merrick finished. "We weren't looking for it, I swear. Someone spotted a glint in the waves, as if the sun itself was shining from under the water. Captain sent me down to investigate, and I saw it." He dipped his head back, the seawater on his forehead glistening like pearls. None of the reef fish would swim past the opening. "I knew right away what it was. I've heard the story so many times." The pirates didn't have to recount the story. Every sailor alive knew it by heart and by gut. A cave filled with treasure. More treasure than a man could spend in a lifetime. More treasure than a man could conjure up in his mind. A gemstone for every grain of sand on the beach. A gold coin for every star in the sky. Well, Merrick broke the pirate from the spell. You found it. Most sailors don't get this far. I hope you feel lucky. Still trembling on his knees, the pirate refused to look at Merrick. As if heaven itself directed your sails, Merrick suddenly cracked into a smile. So go get it. The pirate whipped his head up, alert. Get the treasure, Merrick said. I won't stop you. A sound rose from the pirate's chest, part whimper, part sob. No, he started. No, I don't want... Merrick scratched his chin with his pistol. You know the stories, which means you know what guards my treasure. Yes, the pirate whispered. Merrick closed the gap between him and the pathetic, quivering pirate. Perhaps you thought those parts of the legend were an elaborate lie, exaggerations of my cruelty? No, the pirate cried. No, Because let me assure you... Merrick touched the barrel of his pistol to the man's temple, gently. It could have been the wind, tickling his face. I am as monstrous as they say. The Rasculat's captain and crew tensed, their weapons ready. The poor pirate clenched his eyes shut. I thought it would be worth the risk. And now, Merrick said, twisting the gun's barrel, leaving a rut in the man's skin. Now what do you think? Now, the pirate said, and finally peered up, right into Merrick's eyes. I wish we had taken our chance with Bridgewater. Merrick's blue eyes burned. Too late. He yanked the pirate up to a standing position and pushed him to the railing, the pistol still digging into the man's temple. You wanted to see the great treasure of Merrick the Monstrous, so go get it. The captain of the Rasculat finally spoke. Please, we did not mean. We'll sail away now and never speak of what we have... Merrick cocked the pistol, a deafening click. You're going to swim into that cave, he told the pirate, shaking at the railing. And you're going to get the biggest jewel you can find. You're going to bring it back up here. If he surfaces without it, he ordered the crew, shoot him on sight, turn him into shark bait. A wail escaped from the pirate, guttural and saliva-choked, a horrible noise to come from a feared robber of the sea. He protested and begged, and tried to bargain, but Merrick motioned impatiently, and Bloody Al lifted the man with one arm and tossed him into the sea. Minutes of ghostly quiet followed. Both vessels floated, waiting, the captain of the Rasculat frozen. The white foam from the pirate's dive faded, and the ocean calmed itself back into turquoise glass. One of the Rasculat's pirates bravely called. He has a family, you know, 2 boys, 10 and 6. The 6-year-old lost an arm last year in a fire. Then pray they grow up to be smarter than he, was Merrick's response. The bubbles finally trickled up, those of a man desperate for air, and the pirate kicked through the surface gasping, a pale pink diamond the size of a melon under one arm. What have I done? He cried, swallowing air with loud gulps. What will become of my family? The captain of the Rasculat motioned for his men to reel the pirate back into the schooner. Merrick waited until the man stopped his cries. You're going to take that diamond to the first market you find, and you're going to sell it. Sell it and buy everything you've ever wanted. Retire from the pirate's life. Spoil those 2 sons of yours. Buy your wife the most expensive dress she can find. The wind once again brought his words right to the pirate's ears. And then buy yourself a headstone. The Rasculat left first, speeding away from this nightmare as quickly as they could. Then the whole episode was nothing more than fading ripples on the sea. The Jewel's crew dropped their recent plunder down into the cave, the finest of precious stones, rare obsidian blades, and yes, enough gold to create their own constellations. Down, down, sinking down, straight down through the water into the mouth of the cave. They worked fast, knowing their captain would punish anyone who wouldn't make up for the squandered time with the Rasculat. When the hold was empty of its riches, Bloody Al turned to Merrick for his orders. Chart a course for the market, he said after a moment. Bloody Al raised her eyebrows. Someone is expecting you, she reminded him. He swung his pocket watch by its chain as if it were a yo-yo. As if time itself were nothing but a plaything. Yes, he said, but I don't want to show up empty-handed. She frowned. We just raided 6 cocoa ships and a luxury cruiser. Wasn't there anything? No, he cut in. There wasn't. Nothing worthy. We'll stop by the stalls before we head to the grotto. Bloody Elle started to leave, then turned back and lifted her finger, rubbing the embroidered collar of his greatcoat. Tiny spots of blood smeared across the white stitching, remnants of an earlier skirmish. You might want to get cleaned up before your big date. To witness the ocean's many-pronged ecosystems is to watch the great saga of survival unfold. Consider the seabirds who roost in colonies on perilously rocky cliffs, or the brave clownfish who make a home of venomous anemones, or the polar bear cubs who learn to paddle through the icy waters of the north. This parade of mortal struggle is enough to make one ask, how can life endure such an inhospitable conditions? How can life go on with the bleak shadow of death constantly lurking, fangs sharpened, teeth glistening with hunger? To which we say, joyfully, what other choice is there but to thrive? Exploring an Underwater Fairyland by Dr. and Dr. Quayle. Chapter 9. The sound of Bloody Elle landing loudly on the deck woke Fidelia with a start. Morning, sunshine, the pirate said, reeling a rope around her wrist and elbow. She wound it into a tidy bunch, then tossed it onto a pile of fat wooden pulleys, all of them splintered. Morning? Fidelia sat up on the bench and glanced at the sky, then sank back in relief when she saw the thin blue light of midday. Arberley Island was barely out of sight then, a recent memory on the horizon. No sign of the undertow, not yet. The clouds were wispy now, thin and clear as ice, but Fidelia knew better than to believe a calm sky at this time of year. How long was I asleep? She asked, and checked her bag. All 3 observation books were safely tucked inside, her mother's, her father's, hers. We're about 20 minutes from Arberley, Bloody Elle called from halfway up the mainmast, and you snored through them all. Fidelia stood and immediately felt her legs quiver. Her mouth pooled with hot saliva, her stomach pitched, her head spun. Oh, coppers, you're as green as a bog. Bloody Elle dropped back down onto the deck and guided Fidelia back to the bench. Lost your sea legs, have you? Fidelia defiantly rose back to her feet. No, I haven't, She closed her mouth quickly. Her digestive system was threatening to reverse itself. I just need a minute. Breathe through your nose. Bloody Elle pointed over the railing. The head's that way. Sucking in cool, salty air slowly, Fidelia waited for the world to stop spinning and tried to forget what Bloody Elle had said about losing her sea legs. Just a minor adjustment, she thought. A few more minutes and I'll be right as rain. A seasick quail. It was as ridiculous as a shark swimming backward. But the whirlpool in her belly couldn't be blamed on the ship. The Jewel met every swell with the confidence of a racehorse, head-on, galloping, smoothing out the bumps for its passengers. Impressive for such a raggedy ship. No, this was all Fidelia. She was woefully out of practice for life at sea, drooling and strung out, her eyes dead fish glassy. Bloody Elle offered Fidelia a black jack of water and a bit of dried ginger root. Ginger root is for landlubbers, Fidelia muttered, her stomach still pitching. But she took it and held it to her nose, inhaling. Almost instantly, her tummy calmed its storm, and she was able to breathe without gagging on the briny air. Bloody Elle refastened a splitting line, her fingers quick with the rope. Her sleeves were pushed up, showing her tattoos, those thick black lines around her wrists, and that swallow flying across her left hand. What do they mean? Fidelia asked. Your tattoos. Bloody Elle wrapped the rope around itself, tying a complicated knot. Have you ever been to Conquillas? Just the lagoons, Fidelia said. The teardrop-shaped country jutted out from the mainland, north of Her Majesty's sovereignty. Its coasts were rich with weaver fish and beds of sea urchins. Fidelia had driven the platypus along the continental shelf many times while Dr. and Dr. Quayle dove for samples. Well, in Conquillas we have a saying. Bloody Elle finished the knot and secured its loose ends. No es suelto problemita. And what does that mean? Mind your own business. Bloody Elle snapped her fingers at Cheap Shot Charlie and pointed to the mast. He immediately climbed the mast to check the rest of the lines. A branch of leaves, dried to crunchiness, fell to the deck. Fidelia looked up and frowned. Where has this ship been? She wondered aloud. Pretty much everywhere, Bloody Elle said, with a smack of pride. A snow cave up north, inside another big ship. We hid her in the forest once, hence the leaves. Fidelia squinted at the mizzenmast. Fuzzy green fibers coated the beam. Did you hide her near a lake? Not near a lake, in a lake, Bloody L said. How'd you know? Pine mold, Fidelia said, pointing to the mizzenmast. Did you say you sank this? A whole ship? How? Sealed off her chambers with clay and piled her with sandbags, Captain's idea. Bloody L glanced across the deck at Merrick, who was checking a winch near the stern. He wasn't sure if we'd ever see the Jewel again, or if she'd be rotting at the lake bottom until Kingdom Come. Fidelia stared at the wrinkled, patched sails, the lines crossing at all angles. But I don't understand. Why hide a ship at all? The Navy wants the Jewel as much as they want Merrick the Monstrous. She's a trophy to the Admiral, a symbol. Bloody L peeled away a splinter from the railing. Like those hunters who skin a lion to make a rug. But why not let them have it? Why not take another ship? Fidelia asked. You're pirates, aren't you? Because this is my ship. Merrick suddenly stood a foot away from Fidelia, her glasses reflecting in the liquid of his black and red eye. And I don't sail without her. His peacoat was off, draped over the railing. How shockingly small he looked, without his layer of heavy wool. A pirate captain should be strong, shouldn't he? At least strong enough to scale a mast or man the pump. Merrick didn't seem steady enough to stay upright in the wind. Elle, are we gossiping over tea or are we sailing a ship? Bloody Elle hardened her face at once and gave her full attention to the mizzenmast. Fidelia thought about the sailors who docked in Arborlee, the ones she'd known for years. Every captain had his own set of superstitions. Ratface never allowed bananas on the anemone for fear of bad luck. Stinky Jane, boatswain of the tinderbox, never changed her socks between voyages, which made her awful company during the undertow. Perhaps the Jewel was Merrick's own unique superstition, not a single voyage without his lucky ship. He unfolded her legs and tested her strength. This time, they let her stay standing. She took a few cautious steps across the deck, watching Cheapshot Charlie billow out the canvas sails with his thick arms, Bloody L testing a half-rotten pulley, and Merrick was doing 20 tasks at once. He plugged oakum in the seam between two planks, straightened a line of empty barrels, and consulted the ship's compass. Where is everyone? Fidelia asked. Everyone who? Merrick said. The rest of the crew, Fidelia said. Merrick checked a line in silence. How can you possibly man a ship without any men? Tell me. Merrick yanked the line, his hands white-knuckled, skeleton's hands. Did your parents actually enjoy your incessant questions? Fidelia blinked. She had expected the physical dangers that came with pirates, gunfights, mutiny, scurvy, but less so any emotional rocks they would throw. She jutted out her chin and recited defensively, Knowledge is a vessel deeper than the ocean. A fool splashes in a pond and thinks he has the answers, but a wise man knows that the only way to reach its depths is to ask questions. A quote from a beloved Dr. Quayle? Merrick asked with a sneer. No, Fidelia folded her arms. For my Aunt Julia. He stopped cold, staring out at the water. Another one of your scientists? She shook her head. A librarian. She was surprised at how fiercely the sadness struck her as she thought of her sweet aunt. Sadness and guilt. Aunt Julia had been trying so hard to make a new life for her, a life of comfort and safety, and this morning Fidelia had snapped at her for it. Where was Aunt Julia at this very moment? Fidelia wondered. On the library steps, waiting for Fidelia to come home for dinner? Was she out in the streets of Arborlee, searching for Fidelia in the dark? Had she already called the constables? Aunt Julia would be all alone tonight, with another missing quail to mourn. Fidelia closed her eyes and wished she was back in the loft, seated at Aunt Julia's little green table. She'd even choked down a bowl of that vile turtle soup as an apology for their spat. You probably think I'm gone forever, she messaged her aunt telepathically. But I promise I'll find a way home. Home. Fidelia still didn't know where that really was. I have a question for you, Dr. Quayle. Merrick's mocking broke clean through Fidelia's thoughts. Have you figured out how you're going to get to the bottom of the sea? Fidelia adjusted her glasses. No. He pointed to a bench below a group of shrouds, where he could keep a close eye on her, she noticed. Then get to work. Chapter 10. From the Journal of Dr. Arthur Quayle, May 11th. Today, Ida's studying the migration of the pink crabs on Crabmore Shore. We've been waiting here for 6 hours. The only critters we've seen so far are dozens of oysters, a few limpets in a tide pool, and the molted shells of black-tailed shrimps. Fidelia is trying to be patient, but it isn't easy for a young girl. The crabs will come when they're ready, Ida keeps reassuring us, but then she taps her own foot when she thinks we're not looking. Sometimes this is how it feels, like nature waits until we're not looking. Fidelia's eyes blurred as she scanned the scene her father had doodled in his observation book. A crab waving its pincher and grating, the back of Fidelia charging into the water with her dress sashes untied and streaming. Ida looked back at Arthur, a smile in the corner of her mouth. Slam! Cheap Shot Charlie plunked the crate with the water eater in it on the bench next to Fidelia, all the contents rattling. Get to work. I am working, Fidelia retorted, and defiantly ran her eyes over the same sentence in her father's observation book, again and again, until Cheap Shot Charlie left her alone. She pulled the busted-up pieces of her invention out of the crate and set it on the bench next to her. Flipping through her own observation book, she found her original blueprints for the water eater, all her initial notes, and the sections that had been scrubbed out, scribbled over, and rearranged altogether. Even though she hadn't looked at these plans for weeks, they were seared into her brain. This was her last chance to get it right. If she couldn't figure it out, it would be the end of her. Merrick had promised that. The water eater, as it existed in her daydreams and sketches, was a small rubber mouthpiece attached to a long cylindrical device which stretched out to both sides like a handlebar mustache. The device was covered in rubber scales, each of which allowed seawater to seep through the small holes and enter the filtration chamber. The chamber separated the water molecules from the air molecules, leaving free, clean oxygen to flow into the wearer's mouth. In theory. In reality, however, she had never been able to successfully filter enough oxygen. After a few small gulps, her test run always ended with the whole system flooding. She opened her observation book to a clean page, then uncapped her pen and made an inventory of all the pieces she had. Mouthpiece, hollow cylinder, scales, filtration system, oxygen chamber, hoses, small toolkit, screwdriver, wedge, hammer, worm gear, and handful of bolts and screws. And that was it. No raw material, so she couldn't start over from scratch. No way to plug up the holes in her filtration chamber. No way to extend the cylinders so more water could flow into the system. No way to adjust the angles. No way and no time. She closed her eyes, searching through the caverns of her brain for an answer, a fix, even a starting place. But all she could see was the egg, smashed on the shore of Stony Beach. An invention she'd had such confidence in. She would have bet money that it would survive the undertow, but she'd been so wrong. How could she believe the water eater would be any different? Hungry? Bloody Elle interrupted Fidelia's stream of thought and offered her a choco glomp. Fidelia munched it down gratefully. How's it coming? The pirate asked. Fidelia didn't answer, but Bloody Elle seemed to read Fidelia's thoughts. You'll figure it out, the pirate said. Your folks were fish people, weren't they? They studied fish, yes, Fidelia said. Fish people made it sound like she'd descended from some ichthyosapien hybrid, Ida and Arthur Quayle with gills and fins and scales. She waited for Bloody Elle to leave, but Bloody Elle pulled out another choco glomp and unwrapped it for Fidelia. Fidelia ate it, feeling some of her melancholy dissipate as her body took to the sugar. Her parents, the fish people. Fidelia opened her mother's observation book, turning pages until she found a diagram of angelfish gills. She studied her mother's pen marks, the way the ink pooled the tops of her loopy L's. How she wished Ida were here now, on the other side of the bench, saying calmly, Pull it apart in your mind. Stand on the other side. Now stand on your head. What does it look like now? Mom. Fidelia's eyes stung with tears. Bloody L pointed at the picture of the shark on the opposite page, its tail stretching longer than the paper would allow. That's one scary-looking beast. It's a thresher. See its tail? Fidelia dragged her finger along her mother's drawing. They crack them like whips and stun their prey. We saw one once. She stopped talking, letting her mind play the memory. She and her mother in the egg. Ida at the helm, while Fidelia gawked out the porthole at the shark. 6 feet of fish, 6 feet of tail, Ida had said of the thresher shark, and Fidelia hadn't believed her until she saw for herself. So many animals sounded too fantastic to be true, like fairy tale beasts. Horns and giant eyes and hundreds of legs and scales every color of the rainbow. There are different kinds of sharks, Bloody Elf said. I just watch for the big shark teeth and start swimming. There are 300 species. Fidelia flipped a few pages and found a goblin shark, a rare pink shark with a rusty nail smile and a long, flattened spike for a snout. A funny unicorn, 7-year-old Fidelia had called it. A living fossil, Ida had called it, and had been too goo-goo and starry-eyed to sleep that night. Wow, Bloody L said. I'd hate to run into one of those while taking a dip. You think this one is a monster, Fidelia said. You should have seen this one. She showed Bloody L her own observation book, the slapdash sketch of Grizzle she'd made while waiting for her parents at the Book and Bottle that night. Talk about mythical creatures. Was Grizzle truly that massive? She hadn't really let herself think of him. It was so easy for her mind to wander from the shark to her parents. Did that really happen? She wondered again for the 1000th time since that night. Was Grizzle a real shark? A shark she had baited and tried to tag? Or just a fabrication that had grown, ripple by ripple? Her parents, lost. Did that really happen? He's white as a boat. Bloody L was still balking over Grizzle. So this is one of the famous quail discoveries? Not yet. That's what she would have said 6 weeks ago, before everything in her world upended. No, she said quietly, and closed her observation book. Bloody L watched Fidelia, and looked like she was about to say something when her belly gurgled. Whoops, she slapped it. Time to fill the pit. She rustled through her knapsack for another sweet from Bon Bon Voyage Sweets Shop, a Kaleido rainbow fig. Fidelia was starving too, but when Bloody L tried to pass her a Crocomelo bar, she refused. Please, no. Her stomach felt wrenched inside out. I can't possibly eat any more candy. She searched around her pathetically, as if one of the masts might suddenly sprout apples. Her eyes found the sand pit, a cast-iron cookpot dangling from a tripod above a pile of forsaken coals on the main deck. Fresh seafood. A couple of scallops, grilled on the coals, blackened cod, some boiled sea lettuce. Her mouth watered. Does the Jewel have a fishing pole? But we already have the fish. An unfamiliar voice boomed across the ship. The hatch to the hold was flipped open, and a group of strangers clumped on the quarterdeck, each holding a pair of antique revolvers, silver with ivory inlays, one in each hand, except for a woman with maroon lips and a ribbon with a rose around her neck. She held 2 curved daggers, which she twirled expertly. Fidelia stayed where she was on the bench, barely moving, barely blinking. You have no need for your pistols, a large olive-skinned man with a dark ponytail said to Merrick, who stood at the helm, his gun aimed calmly at the intruders. So you can drop them. Sheepshot Charlie and Bloody L waited for their captain's orders, their own guns steady. Merrick didn't move, except his top lip, which curled ever so slightly, ever so dangerously. Shall we convince you to obey? The man said, his accent heavy. A throng of clicks. The strangers readied their own guns to fire. We had been in the dark, drippy hold for many hours, the man went on. We're tired, we're impatient, and I'm sure a few of us are anxious to test our guns. Make sure they still fire. With a poisonous glare, Merrick dropped his pistol to the floor and motioned for his 2 mates to do the same. Fidelia's heart clenched with sickening fear. What happened now? Merrick's crew was bad enough, but at least they needed her for something. These others, what if they didn't see her as valuable, but as fish food? I thought stowaways were supposed to stay hidden during their stolen ride, Merrick said. Even rats know better than to do their scurrying in daylight. Stowaways. Even Fidelia knew this was an insulting word to just sling around. Back on Arborley Island, whenever stowaways were caught, they were flogged or jailed, or worse. Most stowaways didn't make it past a ship's crew, who were always eager to punish anyone who took a ride without pulling his weight. Stowaways? A barrel-chested man with a ponytail and thistly black beard smiled. Now, you've lost an eye since we last met, yes, but do you truly not recognize us? Fidelia held her breath. The strangers' faces radiated hunger, she now realized, not for food, but for something else, something crueler, bloodier. You and the jewel may look like you've sailed to hell and back, the man hissed, but I know it's you. Merrick said nothing, only twitched his fingers ever so slightly. The man pursed his lips. Well, Prelipes, I suppose we can't expect Merrick the Monstrous to remember every person he's pillaged. The man spat at Merrick's feet and shifted his revolver so they reflected the last gasps of the sunset's gleam. I am Nikiu, captain of the Rasculat. 2 years ago, you took something of ours. Merrick's black and red eye pulsed in its socket like a man of war. So you've come to avenge some chest of gold, he said, as if he were already bored with these intruders, as if this has happened many times before. Go ahead, search every beam. You'll be sorely disappointed in our offerings. No, not gold, Nikiu whispered. A cousin. With a sudden burst, he leaped forward and shoved his guns into Merrick's neck, pressing hard enough into the cords and veins to leave an indentation. Fidelia opened her mouth to yelp, but no noise came out. A cousin, Nikiu repeated, his eyes shining. And now we finally make the monster pay. Bloody Elle and Cheap Shot Charlie strained, but the other strangers' guns stayed locked and aimed at their foreheads. Fidelia's heart thudded against her ribs. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the blast of Merrick's death. Nikiu clenched his teeth, his fingers itching the trigger. Then Merrick coughed. He coughed and coughed and coughed, and instead of shooting, Nikiu stared at the pirate captain and tipped his head back and laughed. Okay, that is where we are stopping for today. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Race to the Bottom of the Sea. We will be back in a few days with another episode, and in the meantime, make sure you're still reading to your reading buddy, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!